Hello. Hey, Ashley, can I have a copy of this video file after we're done?
Nick, are you asking me? This is Ashley.
Hold on one second. I need to fiddling with my mic. I'm sorry, Ashley, can you say that again?
Are you asking me if you can get a copy?
Yes.
Yes, I think you will get a copy because you are hosting the meeting.
I am?
Yes.
Okay. But I don't know if I created the Zoom.
You did create the Zoom.
Okay, good.
So you've got, if you, for some reason you can't get it, let me know and I'll do some research.
Okay.
Okay.
I can't remember what parameters I checked, but that was a while back.
I can't remember what I did earlier today, so I understand.
Just click the record button and it said, please ask the host to give you permission to record. So I may not be the guy.
Okay, I'll look into it.
All right, thanks.
It says recording at my end.
It does. I just don't know who the host is.
I think it's you. You created it. Remember? I asked you to create it, Nick.
That's entirely likely, but there have been so many Zooms.
It is. And then Zoom will send you a link like in an hour or two. And you can share the link with everybody.
Okay. I may have selected cloud. I may have selected local computer. Who knows?
Who knows? There will be a copy somewhere. Let's just wait a couple of minutes. Sometimes it takes people a little bit to log on. Are you in town or are you in California?
In California. Hi, Ann. Cheryl. Lori.
Hello. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, everybody. Did you get rain in California, Nick, and are sending it here now?
Not really, but it's just tends to be really dry over the summer. So there's a dry season and a rainy season. So starting in like November, it will rain for a few months. That's the Mediterranean growing season, Mediterranean climate here and in the Mediterranean, obviously, and the coast of Chile provides some of the most desirable agricultural land and climate in the world. That's why so much produce is grown in California. Hot, dry summers, wet winters.
Huh. Well, we appreciate all that produce that you grow in California, that's for sure.
I do what I can.
Thank you, Nick.
What's your contribution to it, Nick? You do what you can.
I think he buys it and that it supports the farmers, right?
That's true. That's true. But then his contribution is the same as what we're making, right? I guess he buys more California produce than we do. Yeah. Anyways, should we get started, Nick?
Sure.
What's your preference?
We can wait another minute or two.
Okay. Okay. That sounds good. Rebecca, you got the right time now, huh? She locked down at 11. I was like, where's everybody?
I was totally mixed up and tried to log on to this like 2 weeks ago, or like a week ago. It's like, nobody's here.
Oh, wow.
That's how excited we are to watch this.
That's interesting. Yeah, the time zone and all that could be very interesting. We did a doodle poll a while ago, and people were all over the place. Some goes like, well, why is it Eastern time? Or why is Pacific time? Well, doodle makes all these changes without anybody knowing, even it was all over the place.
What's dodo? That sounds like something that became extinct hundreds of years ago.
No, hundreds of years ago.
It's a dodo. Wait,
No,
that's dodo.
doodle? No, doodle pool. It's okay. Well, let's get started. I think people will come in as we go. Well, today we have Dr. Nick Wolfinger presenting for us for Policy Platter. And the title, Nick, your presentation is the same, right? It's does promiscuity affect marriage rates? And sounds like it's a very interesting topic. So without further delay, Nick, I'll hand it over to you and get started.
Thanks, Jesse. So this is actually my first presentation with data in the Corona era. I blew off all those digital conferences last year. So my understanding, I think, is that I just share my overheads. So as some of you know, I've long observed PowerPoint. It, I think, encourages overhead logorrhea. There's no reason why every single word I intone should also appear on a screen. So all the visual aids you're going to get, which I will share now, are the tables and figures in the paper. This isn't just my lonely voice in the wilderness. If you want to know more about why PowerPoint is terrible, I recommend Edward Tufte's pamphlet, The Cognitive Style of PowerPoint. Tufte is a Yale guy with joint appointments in statistics, poli-sci, and computer science, and is one of the world's, really the world's foremost expert in how to present data, in overheads. Nick, your computer is moving too much. Huh. All right, I'll try to, okay. So let me share this. Okay. Okay, that's the right one. And so you see this, but I didn't quite think this through about how to do this, because if I put this full screen, then I can't see my notes, which are on another screen. I didn't, okay. So it turns out I really don't know how to present in the Zoom age.
Nick,
Yes.
you can do options and share part of your screen, so you can only, like, don't put it in presentation mode. Just put it in like the notes mode, and then just share the part with us that you want us to see.
Okay, I want you, I mean, I have the title page here, but otherwise I want you to see, now I want you to see all of this.
Okay, but you can't see your notes, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but that's okay. You can see.
Shrink that down to half your screen and then
Okay.
have your notes on the other half.
Oh, okay, I see what you're getting at. Okay, or even most of my screen, because I don't need to look at this. But let me get going. So don't look at that yet. And let me just start. So one of the most controversial works of scholarship in recent years has been the sociologist Mark Regner's 2017 book, Cheap Sex, The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. It's been the subject of withering reviews. Perhaps most memorable is the first sentence of Phil Cohen's review. And I quote, "Cheap Sex is an awful book that no one needs to read." The central claim of Cheap Sex is pretty straightforward. It is that men nowadays find it so easy to get laid that they won't bother getting married. It's a new retelling of the old debatable, dubious folk wisdom, why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? And so Mark Regnerus wrote an entire book on this point a few years ago. Is it true? Well, it turns out that no one, including Regnerus, has to date actually provided a rigorous test of this hypothesis. And so that's what I'm going to do today. And at this point, let me acknowledge my co-author, Sam Perry at the University of Oklahoma. So we test this hypothesis and we find little evidence from it. We observe a strong negative correlation between the number of premarital sex partners and marriage rates when we use retrospective data, the National Survey of Family Growth, which has been the source of a lot of this research. However, when we move on to panel data from the National Longitudinal Survey 1997 cohort, we find out how things really work. And that is, sex partners in the last year make marriage less likely, but lifetime sex partners don't. So what did we know going into this research? Very little. Almost 30 years ago, Tim Heaton down at BYU and a colleague showed that Caucasian women who lost their virginity early, before ages 15, had high rates of teenage marriage. So too did white women who abstained from sex entirely before marriage. Jeremy Euchre and Chuck Stokes in 2008 documented that people who have ever cohabited and therefore presumably had a sexual relationship, people who ever cohabited were more likely to marry by 23. More recently, Larry Wu, Steve Martin, and Paula England, Wu and England are heavy hitters in this field, documented that about half of the women born in the 1930s and 1940s were already sexually active before marriage, which shows that the decoupling of sex and marriage extends further back than previously thought. You know, some of us have this idea in our heads that everyone married as virgins in the 1950s. Not quite true. With all this in mind, no research has ever looked at whether marriage rates are affected by whether or not you have premarital partners or multiple premarital partners. And this neglect is especially surprising because there's a ton of research showing that premarital sex has consequences for marital quality and stability. And I've done some of this. And in general, marrying as a virgin or marrying only having had sex with one's future spouse produces happier marriages and a lower divorce rate. Analysis I did several years ago based on the General Social Survey shows that people who married as virgins who were only had sex with their eventual spouses are about 10% more likely than people who had 6 or more partners who say their marriages are very happy. And unlike most of you, I can now say I've done a presentation while scratching my pet pig, who's sitting right here. So I and other scholars have also shown that premarital sex makes divorce more likely. A paper I'm now writing with Jesse Smith at Penn State uses data from AdHealth to show that premarital sex partners more than double the odds of divorce. This is the result that's robust to a wide variety of controls. I think most instructive is a 1991 study by Joan Kahn and a colleague, which shows that the relationship between premarital sex and divorce is purely a function of sample selection, where they used a bivariate probit model that simultaneously looked at the chances of having premarital sex and getting divorced. They found that once they estimated a properly identified model like this, there was no longer any causal effect of premarital sex on divorce. That having been said, they don't actually identify what's driving the selection. They only say that it's selection. In other words, the same kinds of people who have premarital sex are also the same kinds of people who are likely to get divorced. So based on all of this, we might certainly think that premarital sex would affect marriage rates. The Regnerus theory suggests that men's frequent and easy access to numerous sex partners might diminish marriage rates, both by disrupting the traditional demand effect, that men will desire marriage less when they can get a ready supply of sex. Therefore, there is also a supply effect if fewer men seeking marriage. According to the Regnerus book, multiple sex partners might also reduce the likelihood that a woman gets married. Regnerus argues that women are collectively surrendering their bargaining power to men when they're willing to have no strings attached sex. Yes, if your reaction to that may well be the same as mine. According to Regnerus, these women will be participating indirectly in their own diminished prospects for marriage. So another pathway by which more sexually active women would be less likely to marry would be their own devaluation as marriage material. So the sexually active women don't think they're marriage material, so they don't get married. Not my theory, okay? So we can see evidence for this theory, however, in that there's a long observed double standard, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Men with multiple partners are seen as players, while promiscuous women are perceived negatively. Indeed, a struggle I had writing this paper is the only word for promiscuous is promiscuous. There are no good one-word synonyms, but promiscuous, of course, is a loaded term that casts a lot of aspersion. So I'll just use it descriptively, but I'm not casting any aspersions. So it's evidence against the Regnerus theory that young people over the last decade or two are having less sex, and in particular, male promiscuity, that is having upper decile, upper percentile numbers of partners, has also declined. So fewer men have a ton of partners. And finally, another really good bit of evidence against the Regnerus theory is Paula England's critique, who pointed out that women's bargaining power vis-a-vis men has increased a lot in recent decades as their employment and earnings have increased, obviously allowing themselves to support themselves and to be more selective in the men they choose. And indeed, educated women over the past few decades are more likely to get married, and that didn't used to be the case. So the Regnerus theory doesn't really account for this. Okay, enough talk. Let's talk about data. We analyzed two national data sets. First, we look at 4 waves of NSFG caught to be between 2002 and 2015. This is the Center for Vital Statistics repeated cross-section. It contains a lot of retrospective information on sexual behavior and marriage. The downside is that the data are retrospective, and there also aren't sufficient data on men to do this analysis. So NSFG analysis I present will only involve women. That having been said, we have 4 waves of data that gives us a sample of almost 30,000 women. And the 4 waves also means we can see if there has been any secular trend in the effects of sex and marriage, one way or another. Okay, then we turn to the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth's 1997 cohort. A large sample of about 10,000 was first interviewed in 1997. They were between the ages of 14 and 22. They were then re-interviewed annually until 2011 and biannually through 2015. There may have been a more recent wave made available the last time I checked. This sample is co-ed, both sex, I don't know how you say that, and offers perspective data. So like most social scientists, we use a ton of models and covariates, which I'm going to explain along the way. One limitation is that we only look at heterosexual marriage, given limitations of the data and the relatively recent advent of national marriage equality. In particular, the NSFG, I've looked at more recent waves, still has a lot of very heteronormative data coding, which seems to imply tacitly that it's only relevant to heterosexual marriage. Okay, let's talk about results. And now I can go back to the this overhead. So, which you can all see, right? I can make it a little bigger. Okay, well, that's the problem. If I minimize that, okay, there we go. Okay, the zoom window was blocking the figure. So there's a lot going on here because there are a lot of lines, but here basically are life tables of the probability of marriage according to how many premarital sex partners you've had. And so this is data from all 4 waves. It's a large sample, and the data are weighted to make them nationally representative. And what you can see is there is a reasonably large effect of sex partners and marriage. The people who are most likely to marry by far are people who have one premarital sex partner. That's probably their future spouse. Their marriage rates are over 90%. That's the pink line. At the other end, those who are less likely to marry are those who have 10 or more partners. They're down under 70%. So that's a big difference, right? Everyone else is in the middle. So it's a bunch of lines all packed together. But there's not much of a story here other than the fact that after one partner, the more partners you have, the less likely you are to be married. Still, I point out over 60% of those who have 10 or more partners eventually get married. So big effect. But very few women have 10 or more partners. On the next page, I make this clear. And you know, something I could do is I can share, because some tables are gonna be pretty busy. Would it help if I shared a link to the paper and tables so people could manipulate them on their own computer? Would that be useful? Hello?
Yeah, you should. Yes, you should do that.
Okay,
Can you put the link in the chat, Nick?
that's what I was gonna do. Give me just a second. Okay, so not only tables, but a full paper.
And Nick, while you're on this table, can you clarify the question asking about the number of sex partners? Does that, specify that this is kind of prior to marriage, or?
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I should have made that clear. Yes, these are premarital partners.
Okay.
And in fact, that was the limitation of the male data, that you couldn't distinguish premarital partners from postmarital. These are all premarital partners. I guess I could have squeezed that into the table, the label. But one thing, the major point I wanted to make on this table is that the overwhelming majority of people have fewer than 10 partners, right? That's only a small percentage of the population. Most people have fewer. So, of not direct relevance to our hypothesis, but inevitable curiosity of myself and other people who read this paper, this kind of work is, what about the people who have a lot of partners, right? Are they likely to marry? And the sample of people in the NSFG is large enough that we can look at tail events, things that are several standard deviations away from the mean. And we see this in figure 2, which contrasts people who have 0 to 9 partners with those who have more. And what you can see is that the more partners you have, the after 9, the less likely you are to get married. That having been said, the differences between those 3 lines, the red line, the purple line, and the green line, those 3 lines at the bottom, aren't that great. And still, the more partners you have, the lower the chances of marriage get. Still, though, even people with 30 or more partners, which is a tiny percentage of the population, even those people, more than half of them eventually get married for the first time. Okay. The first 2 figures you saw show failure rates. Now let's turn to hazard rates. In other words, at what ages is marriage most likely? So we see the hazard rates here. And, it's pretty consistent with what we all understand the median marriage age to be in America. So marriage is most likely just under 30. What's interesting about this is that doesn't really matter whether you've had 1 premarital partner or 10 premarital partners. You're still most likely to marry at 30. That's perhaps a hint that the number of partners you have isn't really affecting the odds of marriage. But let's put that on hold. And let's take one more detour. So figure 4 answers the question of whether there is a secular trend. So I separate out these data by birth cohort, in other words, the birth decade of respondents, and see if there's any difference in marriage age by how many partners they've had. What's the logic for doing this? Well, the world changes. Surely some of you have heard about the sex recession. It's the focus of a big article in the Atlantic last year. It's a good article. If anyone's interested in this, I encourage them to read it. That is, young people are having less sex than they used to. 20 years ago, I had never heard about hooking up, for instance. So since there are changes in sexual behavior, changes that presumably happen both as a result of birth cohort and perhaps of period, we might look it's worthwhile to look, see if there's changes over time. And the answer is there's not much going on. There's the same relationship between marriage age and birth cohort, no matter how many partners you've had. The exception is for people who've had 10 or more partners. And it's just for people born in the 1980s. Those people seem to be waiting longer. I don't know what's going on there. I'm not sure how much importance to place on it. And then we get to people born in the 1990s, and there is right censoring going on. These people just aren't old enough to possibly gotten married, which is why I think all the numbers look the same for people born in the 1990s. Okay, the detours are over, and let me get back to the question about this relationship between premarital sex and marriage. And let's put it to some more rigorous tests. So the first thing we do is a bivariate probit model. A bivariate probit offers models that simultaneous estimation of two models. So we will, at the same time, we will look at the probability of having sex and the probability of getting married. Properly identified, these models should account for all the endogeneity, all the unmeasured factors that are affecting both having sex before marriage and marriage, and should give us more insight into whether there's a causal relationship. A key to bivariate probit models, as with any sample selection model, is proper identification. In other words, we want a variable that affects sex, but not marriage. Fortunately, the NSFG offers many such variables. We had experimented with several of them, as we described in the paper, but the one we go with is age at menarche. Or someone tell me, is that properly pronounced menarche or menarche?
I say the latter. For what
Menarche. Okay, age at menarche. Studies have shown early menarche means early sexual debut, but there's no obvious direct relationship between menarche and when you marry. So one downside here is commercial software only lets you estimate a model with one dichotomous equation, lets you with one of the two equations being a dichotomous variable. So only one of them can be continuous. So again, we're going to estimate two simultaneous equations, one looking at people are virgins, the other looking at whether or not people have gotten married. So we see the results in table, that's too big, table 2, now it's borderline illegible. So for each time we run a bivariate probit model of two equations, we also alongside it present what I call the naive probit, just the probit model on the same outcome, that is marriage, but without the simultaneous equation to account for endogeneity. So the first pair of models on the left is the mostly zero order model. On the right, I add a couple of control variables. So we see, as expected, a strong effect of premarital sex partners in marriage. If you have anything other than one sex partner, you're less likely to get married. I'm not going to interpret the magnitude of these coefficients now for reasons I'll get into. What I'm really most interested in is whether this simultaneous estimation to account for endogeneity is making any difference. And the answer is not really. And there's two ways we can judge that. One is the row term shown at the bottom, measuring the error correlation is tiny and not statistically significant. That suggests we could have estimated the two equations, whether you're a virgin and whether you're married, separately and gotten the same results. In other words, this is showing there's no endogeneity to control for. The second is just a direct comparison between the naive probit and the bivariate probit. So on the left, we see almost nothing. In other words, the coefficients for premarital sex partners are virtually the same for the naive probit and the bivariate probit. On the right, we see a little more going on, but not much. In particular, I draw your attention to the coefficients for marrying as a virgin for no partners. In the naive probit, the coefficient is minus 0.75. In the bivariate probit, that's it, the corresponding coefficient is minus 0.7. So the accounting for the endogeneity is producing some difference. Some of the other coefficients are a little different too. So there's a little going on, but only after we control for mother's education, respondents' education, and whether or not respondents come from an intact family of origin. The row, however, is the stronger test. And so we might come away from this concluding that there is something of a causal relationship. But this brings us then to a better test, and the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth data. Even though we see with the bivariate probit seemingly a causal relationship, we're still relying on retrospective data, and we can get a stronger test with panel data. So we do an event history analysis of entry into marriage on the NLSY data. We use a discrete time model, hazard model. The model is estimated using complementary log-log regression, which is similar to logit, but not quite there. Paul Allison says it's preferable to logit when discrete data approximate a real-time process. Duration dependence is measured with a continuous variable, and I explored the functional form of a bunch of low S models and a generalized additive model. If you're not interested, just sort of repress that last 30 seconds if you're not interested in the technical details, because it's not important. We measure sex partners in two ways here. Since we have annual data, first a set of dummy variables measures annual sex partners. Second, I have a logged continuous variable counting lifetime sex partners. I did more low S, and this showed a large departure from the log linearity for virgins, so that logged count of lifetime partners adds a dummy variable measuring whether people are virgins. So this is the bunch of variables. So we did a bunch of specification tests. We measured sex every which way, and the results didn't change. Here, I'll refer you to the paper rather than bore you. And so let me turn now to these results. If I get these all on one screen, is that semi-legible? Alternately, I could zoom in on one panel at a time.
Yeah, please zoom in on one.
Sure.
Yeah, that.
Zoom. Okay. And actually, the results for men and women aren't that different, but I'll get through all of them in time. So really, the heart of the story is in the first three models. Model one uses the measure of annual sex partners. It's a time varying covariate. And you see, confirm the story I've already told you. Anything but one sex partner in the last year makes marriage less likely. We experimented with lagging that more than a year, didn't matter. So interestingly, the lowest odds of marriage are for virgins, lower than people who've had 5 or more partners in the last year. In other words, you got to get out there. Virgins are people who are probably not dating for the most part or continuing marriage. There's a tiny proportion of virgin marriages nowadays. It's something I've calculated with NLSY. It's under 5%. Okay, model 2 uses the log lifetime measure of sex partners. And here we see a negative effect. That is, if you have more log lifetime sex partners, you're less likely to get married. But the payoff comes in model 3, where we include both measures, that is, sex partners in the last year and log lifetime sex partners. And guess what? That coefficient for log lifetime sex partners, that goes away in model 3. Can you see my cursor move? Okay.
Are these measures highly correlated or they're not?
Good question. Good question. The no lifetime sex partners and the 0 lifetime sex partners has a correlation of about, it's in the paper, it's about 0.6. We have a decent sized sample. We ran the analysis about that last dummy variable, the no lifetime sex partners. The results were the same. Yeah, it's a good guess. We did it. We did it basically every way. We didn't get different results. And log lifetime sex partners is not that highly correlated with annual sex partners. So here's basically the big finding. That is, what you did in the last year matters. What you've done over your lifetime doesn't matter so much. So we then added a bunch of different variables to see if we could explain the effect of sex on marriage. All of them might reasonably be expected to count for spuriousness in the relationship between premarital sex and marriage. All studies show that all of them affect sexual behavior, all of them affect marriage. Be that as it may, none of them really make much of a difference in the relationship between premarital sex and marriage. Model 4 adds parental education, the results remain unchanged. Model 5 adds the most likely culprits, premarital fertility and non-marital cohabitation. Sex, I have been told, sometimes produces children, and some marriages occur at the point of the proverbial shotgun. And if we have fertility and sex, we may also have cohabitation. Of any of the independent variables, cohabitation and fertility give us the most explanatory power and attenuate the sexy coefficients a bit, but still they remain large and statistically significant. The subsequent models add respondent education and religion. In my book with Brad Wilcox 5 years ago, we showed that religious participation has large effects on sexual behavior and marriage. Be that as it may, it can explain the relationship between the two. And by religion, I mean both denomination and attendance at services. So let's finally get to the question of how large the effects are, which I will show you with some hazard ratios. here are the effects for women, but I'll just skip over those. So here are effects of annual sex partners on marriage rates. And you can see the effects are pretty big. Men, they're almost the same for men and women, which is not what the Regnerus theory should suggest, which is, among other things, also something of a gender absolutist theory. Men with and women who have no partners have, are 84, 85% less likely to get married. And there are lower odds for everyone else. For men, there's not much difference between 2 and 5 partners. There's a little more difference for women. But, the story here is fairly basic. Those who are most likely to get married are those people who just have one partner. 0 partners, a lot of partners, less marriage. Okay. Let me conclude. So the final, actually, I'm going to ignore that in the interest of time. What do the results tell us? A few partners have a few people have a lot of sex partners, but it doesn't have much effect on their marriage rates. It just depends upon what you do in any given year. Our results indeed suggest what we call a seasonal association between sexual behavior and marriage, which may well be attributable both to self-selection and the causal effects of having a lot of sexual relationships. It's almost certain that people who regularly pursue unmarried sex with multiple partners will be less interested in settling down at that moment compared to their peers who opt for monogamous relationships. After all, it's more serious to get difficult about one person when he or she has many romantic rivals. But when people do get ready to settle down, they're more likely to let go of their casual relationships, their flings, and invest in a monogamous partner. Our results also don't suggest that sexually adventurous women are less desirable as marital partners. Women have traditionally been stigmatized from non-marital sex, but this doesn't seem like it's affecting their marital behavior. And finally, a broader point is that our results highlight how sex and marriage continue to be uncoupled in America in some ways. Not in most ways, most people don't cheat. But it doesn't matter if you've had a lot of partners, it just matters what you do right before you get married. And with that, I will end and open myself up to questions.
I have a question. So you talked about that this was heterosexual couples.
Yes.
Maybe I missed it, but was this specific to cisgender heterosexual couples, or were?
Yes. Actually, it's not. I just don't, these data sets don't have a measure of gender identification. So I don't know if these couples are cisgender or cis or trans, but so people, but they're included. The data just measure opposite sex marriage. Again, data limitations. I've worked a lot with the sex data and NSFG. I'm really surprised at how heteronormative those data are and how they let you, if you're looking at sex and marriage, while there are measures of same-sex relationships, they don't let you look at marriage. I assume just they're a little slow catching up because it's a large government data set. Jesse, you had a
Yeah, so I mean, so could you tell us a little bit about how you, because to me, kind of if the causal is the other way around, conceptually, it kind of makes more sense to me. Like if you're married, you have one partner. If you're not married, if you're not dating, of course, you have zero. And if you're dating, you may have multiple. So kind of conceptually, that makes a lot of sense. But I know you use panel data, you pay a lot of attention to kind of get to this causal relationship.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how you get to that detail?
Well, so you're totally right. We acknowledge this in the paper that that number of sex partners is in effect censored by marriage, that once you get married, you stop having sex partners. If that's what you're getting at. Or most people stop having more than one sex partner when they get married. So otherwise, what you're saying is a possibility, but we've modeled it as best we can. We've modeled it in a couple of different ways. So I'm not sure where to go with it, aside from the fact that certainly it's possible. Certainly there is some causality possible in people not having sex partners when they get married. It's certainly possible that there's some exogenous influence that's jointly determining both in sex and marriage that we haven't accounted for. All we can really say is when we have two competing measures of sex partners, what happens now matters, what happened before doesn't. So I'm not sure what else to go with it. I'm also reminded of the old adage that economists worry about sample selection, but sociologists study it.
Okay.
I mean, I welcome other ideas for how we can get at that. I think, between looking at panel data and the bivariate probit,
You got that.
we've done about as much. That's especially the bivariate probit model. That's the economist bait, right?
I have a question for that modeling, because I never used that modeling specifically, but the age and monarchy is similar to exclusion restrictions. Then could you go back to the table you showed the bioprobit model? Because if it's similar to exclusion restriction, then shouldn't it be significant in predicting number of sex partner prior to marriage, but not their marriage? If it's the right specification, shouldn't it work like that?
I see what you're saying.
But in your model, it's not significant.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the right way of using this specification if this is indicating the exclusion and restriction, isn't it?
Okay. So I think that, so what you're saying is went into this thinking that agent monarchy is a good way of identifying the model because of what previous studies said, and just common sense that it can't affect when you get married, but it doesn't, once we actually run the model, it doesn't have an effect.
Yeah, but if your model specifications to be correct, then it should predict.
It should, right?
Yeah, but it's not. So I don't know if this model results still guarantee causality of your results. That's my concern.
Okay, that is wait, one second. Now my understanding is that of the model is that even if there is not a significant effect, it was still, let me see if I can put this simply, it is still,
Yeah, I'm just saying because it's not my type of model, but if I just think it as like selection models or IV,
Okay.
then exclusion, this age and marquee is working like exclusion restrictions, then it should predict whether it's virgin or not, but not the marriage outcome. That's my understanding.
yeah.
Economically,
So
so
what
isn't
you're
it?
saying is it shouldn't just logically predict it and on the basis of prior research, but should actually.
Yeah.
Um,
To say that your second model works
Okay.
as a causality. That's my understanding.
So-
How do you think, Jesse?
So let me just add one thing that's in the paper. We did this a few other ways. There is an even better, and so this is my usual answer. Just we did this a bunch of different ways and we didn't get much of a result. So did this. There's an even better measure of identification here, and that is whether people had abstinence-only education. We didn't use that in the end because that's only asked of a section of the sample, and the sample will get much smaller. That gives us similar results. We also tried this with the NOSY data, and we also got similar results, which is, not having anything going on. But what you're saying is perhaps we should redo it. We should, if we choose to present results, we should only present them if we actually have that identifying factor producing a statistically significant effect.
That's my understanding on this method.
Okay, Jesse,
Yeah.
is that what you think too?
Yeah.
So it's not enough just to have something that's, that's producing.
Yeah, I mean, based on literature, it makes sense, but the data doesn't show it's true. So that's my concern. Yeah.
Okay.
We run a by probit model before. One is migration, whether you move, the other one home ownership. We try to do a similar thing like what Nick did. In some cases, I see what the idea is that you're supposed to find a variable that, significant one, but not the other. The issue really is when you have this by probit model, what is the condition, right? So you have to, bottom line is I see the point, but I don't see this as as important as I think what Nick done is probably sufficient. Try to see different specification, and that's what I understand of the by probit model. But I think we are short on time. Just have very quick question for Nick. In my social policy class, sorry for that. There's a surge in the number of, or even percent of all wedlock births. And my question to you is, has the meaning of marriage and long-term partnership evolved, changed over time, which might be one of the causal factor for this surge in the number of wedlock births? That's number one question. That number two question is, what are the reasons behind the changing pattern? I think Janet Yellen proposed idea of shotgun marriage. One of the possible reasons.
I think the Yellen paper is good. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
That's a bigger question than I can answer now. But let me refer people to that paper by our current U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and her husband George Akerlof, who wrote in the 90s on the subject. I think that's good. That rate of non-marital births has peaked and started declining. It's below 40% now, but it's still high. The other thing that's really changed about marriage is it's now the domain of people with college degrees, much more. If you have a college degree, you're much more likely to get married and stay married. If you don't have a four-year college degree, the chances of being married are lower. So let me just get back to what you were saying, Sue. So I think then it's good. It's a good point. We could, I understanding is this is what Joe said, that this is significant, this is sufficient, but a stronger test would actually be something that produces a meaningful result. So maybe we'll present not the menarche results, but the results based on sex education or something else. It's all trade-offs. And in any event, the NLSY and part of the analysis is a more important part of the paper. You're muted, Jesse.
Okay, I'm muted. We're at about 2 o'clock, so faculty meeting is going to start. Thank you so much, Nick. Very interesting research. Let's give Nick a hand. Yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon at a different Zoom meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good job, Nick.
Thanks. How do I leave this? Oh.